Heaven got sick, not from war, from a parasite. The first corruption wasn't a rebellion. It was an infection, born inside God's most perfect creations. And it started with one unbearable act. What if the real horror isn't the story of a fall, but of an infection that used beings of pure light as its first host, and rotted paradise from the inside out? The story you know is wrong. The war for heaven wasn't about pride, it was about jealousy. And it didn't begin with a defiant cry, but with a biological tremor, a cellular corruption in the very essence of beings made of light and fire. This is the story of how a single, unbearable act of God gave birth to a contagion that devoured heaven from the inside out. The crystalline anatomy of heaven. Before our concept of time, there was the perfect, sterile architecture of heaven. Imagine a realm not of soft clouds, but of flawless, crystalline structure. At its heart, the light of God flowed through the angelic choirs like blood, a constant, unchanging pulse of pure existence. For the angels, this wasn't an order, it was anatomy. Their reality was spirit and fire, eternal and rigid. Humans were a curiosity, creatures of wet earth and fragile breath, beloved by the Creator certainly, but fundamentally other. An angel could no more comprehend becoming human than a thought could comprehend becoming a stone. This was the foundational law of their biology, a truth that seemed as immutable as the divine light that animated them. They were the firstborn, the flawless, and this order was the very fabric of their being. The Unspeakable Metamorphosis. Then came Enoch, a mortal, just a man. Scripture says he walked with God and he was not, for God took him. But non-canonical mystical texts, like the third Book of Enoch, describe something far more terrifying than a simple journey to paradise. Enoch wasn't just brought to heaven, he was unmade by it. The furnace of God's gaze didn't just burn away his mortality, it boiled it. The texts speak of a horrifying and glorious transformation. His flesh didn't turn to ash, but sloughed off as incandescent vapor. His bones, once brittle calcium, warped and elongated into impossible, shrieking geometries of living light. His veins didn't carry blood, but became conduits of raw fire. 72 wings of blinding light erupted from his back, tearing through his new form. God placed this screaming, remade thing on a throne, a privilege no angel, destined to stand forever, had ever known. And then, the final violation. The being that was Enoch was given a new name, carved into his very essence, Metatron. With it came a title that was a shockwave to the celestial anatomy, the lesser YHWH, a name echoing God's own. A creature of dust had been boiled, reshaped, and placed in authority over the firstborn of creation. The laws of existence had just been gruesomely vivisected. The first symptom. The reaction wasn't a thought, it was a physical symptom. Imagine an archangel, a being of pure, resonant light, suddenly feeling a cold spot in its core, a flicker. For the first time, a celestial being felt its own light dim, a tremor in its fiery wings. It was a biological shiver of wrongness, a cellular rejection. This burgeoning jealousy was not an emotion. It was the first sign of a disease. A whisper, a shared vibration passed between them. That, a thing of filth and decay, is raised above us, given a throne, branded with a name that mimics the Almighty? This wasn't the pride of wanting more. It was the bitter physical revulsion of the perfect for the contaminated. And this new alien sensation, this cold shudder in the light, began to spread. The birth of the Sentient Dread. A version of the breaking point is twistedly recorded in the Talmud. A rabbi mystically ascends and sees Metatron sitting, an act of heresy, for only God sits in heaven. The rabbi cries, Perhaps there are two powers in heaven. The story says that to prove God's singularity, angels took Metatron and struck him with 60 lashes of fire, showing he could be punished. But seen through this darker lens, what if this wasn't a lesson? What if it was an opportunity, the first violent physical manifestation of their collective revulsion, the chance to humiliate the source of their spiritual necrosis? In that moment, as lashes of fire struck the transfigured man, the million separate shivers of coldness coagulated. The festering envy achieved critical mass. It was no longer a feeling, but a single, unified thing. A psychic tumor growing in the heart of paradise. Let's call it the Sentient Dread. It had no mind, it had no voice, it simply hungered. A biological horror born of wounded pride, its only impulse to validate the grievance that birthed it, to prove that elevating man was a blight that must be violently purged. The Great Decay. The birth of the Sentient Dread was the true fall, not a fall into a pit, but an internal rot. Heaven became a gilded plague ward. In this dark retelling, the famous falls of other angels were not choices, but symptoms of this deeper contagion. The pride that caused Lucifer's fall and the lust that doomed the watchers in the Book of Enoch were merely pre-existing conditions. Weaknesses the Dread could exploit. The Dread didn't whisper to Lucifer, "You are right to be proud." It became a fever in his core, turning his self-admiration into a burning, narcissistic lesion that demanded worship. It didn't tempt the watchers with lust for human women. It burrowed into their grace, twisting their perception of humanity into a gnawing, predatory hunger. Angels began to see deformities in their own perfect forms. A feather bent at a sickening angle, a flicker of shadow where pure light should be. The Dread didn't command. It metastasized, nurturing their failings, poisoning them with the same revulsion that created it. It sought to prove humanity's unworthiness by driving angels to transgress, then pointing to the chaos as proof that the original contamination, Metatron, was the cause of it all. The traditional story of fallen angels is an epic of war and rebellion. But perhaps the true corruption was a quiet, biological horror. A slow decay born not from a desire for God's throne, but from the cellular inability to accept a change in the divine order. The unspeakable sin wasn't that a man was elevated. That was God's will. The sin was the festering, prideful envy of the angels, an emotion so potent it became a parasitic entity, a self-sustaining horror that would forever haunt and feed on its creators. Before any angel fell from heaven, they first became sick within themselves. And so, the truly terrifying question isn't what happens when perfect beings rebel. It's what happens when their perfection becomes a weakness, allowing a sickness born from their own hearts to become their damnation. The Sentient Dread isn't just a legend. It's the essence of that cold, bitter jealousy that asks, why them and not me? And that sickness didn't end with them.